Hi everyone, it's Phil Frost from Main Street ROI, and I have Fred Valleys from Optimizer, and Fred is actually going to present tips for AdWords success from a Google insider. Fred is an ex-Googler, and he was actually there when I believe he was there putting together the Google AdWords platform, so he's got a lot of good insights for us today. I'm really excited for this presentation, and before he dives in, put together a quick slide here about me and Main Street ROI. Again, my name is Phil Frost, the founder of Main Street ROI, and our business provides digital marketing services, primarily search engine optimization, as well as Google AdWords setup and management, and email marketing. And we also provide training like this free presentation we're giving today, or that Fred's presenting. And we also have some paid courses as well that go into more detail about Google AdWords, SEO, Facebook advertising, and email marketing. And the last slide I will show before Fred takes it away, I'm also the proud father of these cute kids here. That is my beautiful wife, Erin, on the left, Emmett in the middle. He's now 1.5 years old. And my big girl, Violet, she's now 4 years old. Her birthday was on January 2nd, so not too long ago. So with that, let me kick this over to Fred. I think he stole the controls already.
Yeah, I've stolen them. Thank you, Phil, and thank you everyone for coming today. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you can see this now, Phil, if you can confirm. So, but how to be successful with AdWords in 2017.
Yes,
so at the beginning of every year, this is certainly one of the favorite topics, like how do we prepare for that upcoming year, make sure we're just as successful as the year before it. And so the reason I'm talking about AdWords is, like Phil was saying, I've done quite a bit of work there. So I actually was with the Google team from 2002 until 2012, and I was one of the people who started the AdWords editor team. So for anyone who's using AdWords today, that's probably, hopefully, one of your favorite tools that's out there. I was also involved in the acquisition of a small company called Urchin. Nowadays, it's better known as Google Analytics. And I also did stuff like working on conversion tracking for AdWords. There was actually a day before conversion tracking was something they did, kind of crazy. But so I had a fun time working at Google in those very early days and kind of building the AdWords platform. So in 2012, though, I decided to strike out on my own and started managing some accounts for people and doing some AdWords management. But I actually found it to be pretty cumbersome and complicated and time-consuming, which was a bit shocking because I was one of the people who was supposed to have built this great AdWords platform for making it super easy to manage these things. But then the reality sets in, and I was like, okay, there's got to be something better than that. So I started a company called Optimizer, and in Optimizer we really build tools to streamline AdWords management. So you can check that out if you're interested in that sort of a thing. And if you want to know kind of my general thoughts on the search marketing industry, you can follow my blog on Search Engine Land, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Silicon Valleys. So what I promised I would cover today are 3 topics that I think are very important. Nowadays, these are like 3 out of the 5 biggest trends that most people would probably point to as far as AdWords goes. But number 1 is expanded text ads. Right, so there's an ad format change that's going to be happening very soon. It's already been happening, but the old format is going away soon. So it's important to talk about that right now. Automation is the next topic. Specifically, I'm going to cover bid automation, but automation in general is a big topic because we all know what we want to do, but oftentimes these tasks are cumbersome, slow, and so, we have other things to do besides manage AdWords in our lives. Like Phil, he probably wants to go and spend some time with his kids. I have 2 kids of my own. You probably have families, kids, activities, hobbies, right? So the more we can automate and do it in a smart way, the more we can get back to the things that really matter to us. And AdWords does matter a lot to me, but there's more important things besides that. And then finally, audience targeting. I think this is a really interesting topic because AdWords used to be all about keyword targeting, but let's not forget marketing is about connecting with people and convincing those people to do something. And so the more types of audience targeting capabilities we have, the better of a job we can do in that arena. But let's jump into it. So the first topic is these improved ad formats, and specifically is the transition to expanded text ads. Now, for any of you already doing PPC advertising and AdWords, hopefully you're well into your transition to expanded text ads. These have been out for a couple of months now. And in fact, Google was going to sunset the old legacy ad format back in October, I believe was the original date. But then they figured out it wasn't quite ready to be done, so they've actually pushed it back now to January 31st. But after the end of this month, you will no longer be able to make your typical legacy ad. So what you see on the left of that screen, that's a legacy ad. It's got a short headline, and then it's got two pieces of description which combine into a longer description line. What you see on the right-hand side is the new ad format, which has two pieces of headline. So the headline and the link is much more prominent. And then the description is also still a good size, but instead of having to break it out into two separate lines, it's actually a single line of ad text, which is a little bit simpler to create because you don't have to worry about the position of where the line break happens. Now, one thing that I spoke to one of the Google product managers about was the fact that I was asking, why did you guys delay the launch or the sunset of the old ads to January 31st? And he basically said, well, when ETAs, expanded text ads, they do better, they significantly outperform the legacy ads. But Google sort of made a miscalculation in how quickly they wanted people to move over. So people have been doing years and years of ad testing and ad text optimization on the legacy ad format. It's quite unreasonable to expect that you put in one batch of expanded text ads and instantly those are going to be doing better and outperforming the legacy ads. So they wanted to give people more time to really get to that result that they know is out there, which is a better CTR. And so what I'm showing on the right-hand side, these are box plots. So we did a study, I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, but basically we see that on average, sort of the median is a 4.64% CTR for an ETA expanded text ad versus a 3.61 for a legacy ad. Now, how do these box plot and these visualizations work? I'm going to quickly explain it because I'll have a lot more of these box plots, but basically what you're looking at in the box is the second and the third quartile. So this is a distribution of probabilities of different CTRs happening. The dotted line and then the top bar, that shows you sort of the high end of the range, the first quartile, and then the fourth quartile is on the bottom. Okay, so and then that black line right in the middle, that indicates the median value, and that's also the value that I'm putting on those slides. So at Optimizer, my company, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of ads, and we decided to take a look at the performance of these ads to figure out if there are certain things that we can learn about what makes for a really good expanded text ads. So we looked at 1.2 million separate ads, and we asked a few questions. So first of all, as advertisers, we've often heard about DKI, dynamic keyword insertion, and this is where you can automatically insert whatever the keyword from your account is into the ad text. So as opposed to making 1,000 different ad text variations, you put in this one dynamic component, the DKI, dynamic keyword insertion, and it automatically fills in the ad text with whatever the keyword was from your account. So you see an example there. I've put the box around it in orange. So the question is, does using dynamic keyword insertion actually boost the performance of an ad? So first we asked that question for legacy ads. And so we saw that, in fact, when you use DKI in a title field, it does boost your CTR by a good amount. So the median there is 5% versus around 3.5% if you're not using DKI. Now, we also asked the same question for using DKI in the description field. Now it looks like in the description, it's not quite as important, right? So the CTR there is actually a little bit lower. Now, if we look at expanded text ads specifically, we were hoping to see similar results. And what we saw was if you have the DKI in the description field, it's still not a really good thing. It's not really helping the CTR. So the result was similar to what we saw for ads in general. But then we got a bit of a surprise, and then we ran the same study, and we said, what about if you use DKI in the title field of an expanded text ad? And so this was our first surprise. DKI in a title field for an expanded text ad doesn't actually perform quite as well as it used to in those legacy ads. Okay, so now that's not to say that at some point in the future, they can't start performing at those same levels, but it almost seems that because you now have two headlines, you have much more that you can say in the headline, the lazy approach of doing dynamic keyword insertion doesn't seem to pay off quite as much as it did in the older ad format. Okay, so that was an interesting insight. Now, the second thing we looked at was using path 1 and path 2. So these are new components where in the past you would put in a visible URL. Nowadays, Google automatically pulls the URL of the landing page, but you can put in two what they call path values to kind of describe it in keywords. So we said, is there actually a benefit of using these two path fields? And so we noticed that if you use one path, the CTR is actually higher than if you use both of the path fields. And so you can see the numbers behind that. So again, that was a bit of a surprise, but it says you don't need to be using all of the path fields to have the best CTR performance. And obviously, keep in mind, all of these are average results across 1.2 million advertisers, so individual results may vary. You have to test this for yourself, but this was kind of an interesting finding for us, that you don't always have to take advantage of all the text to get the most benefit. Okay, then what about repeating these path texts inside of the ad text? So is a repetition at some level a good thing or a bad thing? And so what we saw here was if we use the path in the headline, depending on how many times, so we have two headline fields and we have two fields of path, so we can reuse that same text up to 4 times. So it could be 0 where we don't do any repetition, or it could be 4 times where we have path value 1, optimization, and path value number 2, tools, both appearing in headline 1, as well as both appearing in headline 2, so that's a lot of repetition. Not a lot of people do this, but the few that did actually saw really good CTRs, right? And so, by the way, the width of these boxes indicates how many samples we have from people doing that behavior. So the most common behavior, as you can see here, is people repeating only one of these values in the headline, but that actually has a slightly lower CTR than not doing any repetition at all. And so it seems like a little bit more repetition initially decreases CTR, but the few people who've experimented successfully with doing a lot of repetition actually have really good CTRs. So there's not a strong takeaway from my perspective on this, but again, it's an interesting thing that you could evaluate in your accounts, and this is kind of what we're seeing. So now, as far as using the path in the description text, there we actually do see an improvement. And so if you use both of the path fields in your description, we do see a 10.2% CTR, which is pretty good, and the sample size behind it is also a bit better. And that maybe speaks to the fact that you can now use your description line to really highlight the benefits and what your product is all about. So there's much more space than you used to have in the past, and really taking advantage of that and repeating your core value proposition could actually be a good thing when it comes to CTR. Now, the other thing is you have these much longer ads, but you don't have to fill every character of space. And so our question was, does it actually pay off to write really long ads? Okay, so the first thing we looked at was, what is the length of the description? Does it really seem to matter to write a longer description? And so here it does, right? So you see people who tend to max out between 71 and 80 characters of text for the description, which is what you can put in. They tend to have the highest CTRs that we see. So use all the extra description space. On the other hand, the headlines, we didn't see that same strong correlation. So there's a little bit of a benefit there, between using 31 characters going up to 51 characters. It's actually almost the same, but there's a little bit of a drop off in the middle. But what was interesting was that in the lower ranges of character counts, people actually did have higher CTRs. So that kind of tells us a surprise, but headlines can in fact be left a little bit shorter. So don't just stuff them full of useless information when you could make a great message in a very brief number of characters. Okay, so I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but I know people are always looking for takeaways. So here's a bunch of takeaways as far as what you can do to test these new ETAs. And these are actually Google tips, and I've distilled them a bit in terms of how they make sense to me. But basically, test multiple versions of your expanded text ad. So just the same way that you've done ad text testing in the past, you want to keep doing that for ETAs. Google, in fact, recommends putting up 5 experiments in any of your ad groups. And then, kind of to state the obvious, but some people don't do this, but leave your standard text ads running until the new ones are consistently outperforming them. So in Optimizer, we have a testing platform that will help you do this process and then decide when the legacy ads are being outperformed by the new expanded text ads. But don't just go with the new cool thing that Google has. Actually wait for those new things, those expanded text ads, to do better than the old ones before you get rid of them. And given that we have until January 31st to make more legacy ads, if those really work well for you, make sure you have that loaded up before the sunset date on January 31st. Number 2 is focus your testing on headlines. Again, not surprising. The headline is that thing that shows up in bold. It's in blue. It's the link. So, but also Google says consider shorter headlines for branded ad groups. And so we didn't specifically do our analysis between brand and non-brand, but it does kind of piggyback on what we were saying. So you don't always have to have super long headlines to have a successful ad. So then Google says if it's a branded ad, sometimes it's just good enough to say the official homepage, the official site of whatever your brand is, if that's a recognizable brand. And then obviously find when longer headlines worked well in the past. Now what Google used to do is they used to combine the headline with description line 1 and render that on the screen as a long headline, even though it wasn't necessarily a headline component. So they would actually combine those two pieces of text into a long headline. If you have stats that show you which of those combinations worked really well, that's an ideal starting point for you to make new expanded text ads as a starting point for your future experimentation. And then one of the core tenets of AdWords has always been relevance, relevance, relevance. And I've given quality score presentations for Phil and the Main Street ROI audience. So if you want to see what that quality score and relevance thing is all about, we do have a recording, so you can look in the Main Street ROI archive for that. But basically what Google is saying, do not just go and implement the same expanded text ad across many different ad groups. Actually spend some time to figure out what each ad group is selling, what the key value propositions are, and really make sure you write ads specific to those things. And then some people also go about the process of taking existing legacy ads, converting them into expanded text ads. In fact, Google has a nice little script-based tool for this, but it leaves one of the headlines blank. So what Google is saying, don't just go and stick the same value in for all of those blank headlines, because the text may not read correctly anymore when the ad shows up on the screen. And you probably should actually say different things depending on which products or which services are being sold in each ad group. Okay, so that's the transition to expanded text ads. The second topic here is PPC automation, right? And this is getting back to getting time, which is the most valuable resource that any of us are given in this world. So, why do we want to do automation? Well, there's actually a couple of reasons. If you look at the t-shirts these folks are wearing, I'm often reminded when you give presentations, when you get up on stage, when you do a webinar, don't use words or phrases like this. But the reason I'm doing and I'm putting this up here is these are actually t-shirts that are given out at a conference, at a PPC conference, by one of Optimizer's competitors. And they do automation, and they very correctly say that humans don't like repetitive tasks. They don't like tedious tasks. At least the majority of us don't, right? We get distracted. We're not as good as machines are at math. And we want to work on fun projects. We want to use creativity. We want to write maybe new ad text variations as opposed to sit on a spreadsheet all day long and run the same calculation to come up with the right bid. Right? So there's certain things that humans just aren't the best at. And that's why you want to look at automation. But at the same time, we've all seen the Tesla cars nowadays, and they have autopilot running. And it's a beautiful type of automation, and I love self-driving cars. I mean, I see them drive past my house several times a day. We're very close here to the Google headquarters, but this is the reality of automation, right? Sometimes it's going to get it wrong, and it's going to just run into something. So ideally, what you need is smart automation that you're staying on top of, that you've kind of set up, so that these types of things don't happen. And if the car is close to hitting that post, you can actually stop it. And so to take that analogy to PPC, if you see the bids heading in the wrong direction because of something the machine understood incorrectly, you should be able to step in and correct that. So bid automation, that's probably the most common one. It's a huge time saver, so let's talk about bidding for a second. Now, it used to be in AdWords that bidding was, I don't want to say simple, but it was certainly simpler than it is today. And that's because in the past, every keyword had a CPC bid. And that was basically it. We had a CPC bid, maximum CPC, that was the end of the story. Nowadays, though, we have what we call modifiers or bid adjustments. So now, instead of having two separate campaigns, one targeting maybe the state of New York and a different one targeting the state of California, now you can actually have those two in a single campaign, and you would use geographic bid modifiers to set different bids for those two audiences, depending on what state they're in. Okay, the same happens for demographics, RLSA. RLSA stands for remarketing lists for search ads. So depending on who the user is who sees your ad, you can also have a bid adjustment. You can do the same for devices. So a person on a mobile device versus a desktop computer, are you going to be bidding the same thing, or do you actually want to move it up or down a bit? And then day parting is the final one. So that's basically saying at certain hours of the week, we perhaps know we have a higher conversion rate, so we want to bid higher to capture more impression share at that time of the day. But where that leaves us is we have the CPC bid, and now we have a bunch of axes here. So we have maybe a couple of locations we want to target, 3 different devices. We have 6 day parts that Google allows us to do per day. And then if you look at that red box, so that's like a specific device in a specific location for a specific day part, but that box itself can now be further subdivided by however many audiences you have. And you can actually have a ton of audience lists, right? And I'll talk more about audiences in the last segment here. But so what that means is for a single keyword where in the past we might have had a single bid, now we have tens of thousands of permutations of when that keyword actually shows an ad. So we have 1,000 locations, 3 devices, 6 day parts, 2 genders, 5 age ranges. That's 180,000 bids that we have to consider for that single keyword. Okay, and so me considering 180,000 bids, that's just more than I can do as a human. And so that's where we have to start thinking about some level of automation. And by the way, I call this matrix bid management, where you basically have to figure out where on the matrix that keyword and the commonalities live, and then you can set the bid for that. Now, I also wanted to point out a common bid management mistake that people have started making since enhanced campaigns started. And for those of you who don't remember, but in 2013, Google introduced enhanced campaigns, and that was basically them doing the first introduction of a bid adjustment. So they said you can now only have one campaign, and then you'll set your device type bid adjustments within that. Okay, so here's the problem. People would look at mobile data plus desktop data plus tablet data, and they would get some sort of an average. And by the way, that average number, that's typically what you see on the AdWords screen. So unless you're doing segmentation and you see how many impressions and clicks and CPC and conversions you've gotten, if you're not segmenting that, you're looking at the average for all 3 devices. So people then go and take that bid, and that becomes their CPC-based bid, and then they go and they set different bid adjustments based on the device type. So how did a mobile device perform versus a desktop device? Well, this is in fact incorrect, because if you're using the average data and then setting a bid adjustment for the device afterwards, you've already considered the data from that mobile device, and so you're kind of not bidding exactly correctly. So what you typically would want to do is use one of your devices, use that data to set your CPC bid, and then the bid adjustments can be done based on the relative difference in performance between those 2 different devices. So that's a bit of an advanced point. I hope that people understand what that meant. If you didn't fully get that, maybe come back to this slide, think about it a little bit more, but this is a pretty fundamental and important point about modern bid management. Now, the other thing that we really like to do here in Optimizer is looking at data sparsity, right? It's very difficult to have enough data to make a good, statistically significant decision, especially if you've done an awesome job of setting up a great campaign and ad group structure. And so if you look at this screen here, we're doing geographic bid modification. If you look at that one specific campaign, well, look in the conversions column. So we have 7 conversion data points to make a bid decision to say that in the United States, maybe we should decrease our bids by 60%, right, for that geography. Well, okay, 7 conversions, that's probably enough to make a pretty good decision. Google typically likes 15 conversions over 30 days to make a decision, but you can set your own threshold depending on what makes you feel comfortable. Now, if you look at the top here in the United Kingdom, we don't have any campaign that has more than 3 conversion data points over that same date range. So where that leaves us is we can do some aggregation. So if you total that up, you actually do have 5 conversion data points across the whole United Kingdom. And so that could inform a bid adjustment that you set. But rather than using individual campaign data, now we're using the aggregate between all of those campaigns that have something in common, and that commonality happens to be the geography in which those ads show. Now, I've illustrated this for geographies, but you could just as well do this for device types. You could do it for device types. You can do it for audiences. You can do it for demographics, right? So it's all about getting to enough data to make a smart decision. Okay, so with these considerations in mind, you have a couple of options when it comes to bid automation. There's one which is called rules-based bidding. And a very simple example of that is saying if we have more than 100 clicks and our CPA is less than $20, then that's going to result in a 10% increase in the bid that I'm going to set. Okay, so it's a very simple rule where each entity is individually considered. So each keyword, each ad group in this case would be compared to those rules, and then that would be the resulting bid change. Portfolio bidding, on the other hand, and this is what we'll talk about that Google is doing as far as automation, but that finds similar entities and manages that whole portfolio, that whole packet, if you will, to a common average goal, which could be a cost per acquisition goal or a return on ad spend goal. Now, as far as rules-based bidding, it very simply boils down to this. So I was working with one agency called SalesX, and they have what they call the bucket bid method. It's very simple. So they divide their keywords in a couple of buckets, and these are kind of representative. There could be more buckets here, but one of the buckets is high converters. These are keywords that in the last 30 days had at least 5 conversions. And then they have a bucket of known converters. They didn't quite have 5 conversions, but they at least had 1 conversion over the last 30 days. And then there's that bucket of unknown. So they had no conversions, but they also had very few impressions, so they didn't really get a chance to prove themselves. And so based on this, they then set bid strategies. And they automatically go and set either a top of page or a first page bid methodology. And in that second case, they take the first page bid recommendation from Google and they increment it by 50%. Right? So that's just how they happen to do it. But the point here is in the rules-based system, you just filter your data and then you take the decision based on each of those. Now, one of the important things when you're doing a rules-based system like this is to avoid overlap. A lot of people, when they start building rules, they end up with keywords or ad groups that actually meet multiple conditions. And that's always bad because in that case, you could be stacking your bid. So you could be bidding up 10% twice in a row, which would leave your bid too high, higher than where you wanted it to be. So Mike Rhodes, one of my friends from who runs PPC Savvy, he came up with this whole methodology. So he's using like a mind mapping type system, but he's using it to determine the rules that he wants to run. And so at each branch, starting from the left, he's making one decision. So he's saying either the impressions are 0, the yellow line, or the impressions are greater than 0, the blue line. Okay, and if the impressions are greater than 0, that once again branches with 2 mutually exclusive decision points. And then you can see the purple line in the bottom right of the screen. So there the branching goes to 4 different places. But notice that at every branch, everything's mutually exclusive. So by the time you look at the right side of that page, every one of those conditions, every one of those outcomes corresponds to exactly one set of keywords or one set of ad groups. You're going to have no duplication. So this is a nice way to come up with rules that you want to build. And then, of course, the next step is going to be to program those rules. And that's something you could do through Optimizer. It's also something you could do through automated rules in AdWords. Now, the other mistake, and again, consideration you have to keep in mind is if you're going to be doing some sort of a rules-based system, what is your look-back window? So if my condition is, if my average position is too low, then I want to raise my bid by 10%. Maybe I'm doing a bid to position type thing. Okay, well, if I look at 4 weeks, or in this case, 3 weeks of historical data, and my position is too low, I say, let me raise my bid by 10%. And then 1 week later, I run the same analysis, looking at the last 3 weeks, and I say, once again, increase my bid by 10%. But what's wrong with this? Well, what's wrong with this is that a week ago, you raised your bid. So what happened in the last week, that's actually representative of what your new bid represents. The average that you're looking at for those last 3 weeks is influenced by those 2 weeks before when you hadn't changed your bid yet. So what you really should be doing is run your analysis, and if you're going to do weekly bid changes, you need to look at a 1 week period every single time to make sure that you're making the decisions based on the right level of data. So that's another thing. You can obviously program that into whatever rule engine you have, but do keep it in mind. because otherwise you might see some unexpected results. Okay, now Google has portfolio bid strategies. These are completely free, so these are a great solution if you want to try something out. And Google has these bid strategies that you see on here. So anything from maximizing clicks, which I don't particularly like. I don't think it should be about getting more clicks. I think it should be about getting more high quality conversions. So I really like target cost per acquisition and target return on ad spend as the rules. Now, if you're going to manage your CPC bid very tightly yourself, enhanced CPC is actually a really nice option, because enhanced CPC takes your base level bid but will increase or decrease it based on the circumstances around every single search that happens. So in real time, Google knows, oh, this search happened from a user based in this location, this is the current weather, this is the type of device they're on, et cetera, et cetera. So they know all these things, and based on that, they can make an estimation of the likelihood of conversion. And if they think it's high, they're going to boost your bid. If they think it's low, then they're not going to do that. Okay, and then a crazy strategy that Google has is target outrank. This is where you can actually say, here's my competitor's domain. Google, just go ahead and make sure that I remain ahead of that specific competitor. Okay, so these are all free for you to use. Now, if you use one of the more common ones, target cost per acquisition and target return on ad spend, I just want to make the point that these are portfolio bid strategies. So even if across the whole business unit you have a cost per acquisition goal of, say, $15, and you sell cruises and you sell flights, and one of them is more expensive than the other, do remember they're actually going to subsidize each other. So the expensive cruises that you sell could subsidize the cheaper flights that you sell, where your CPA is actually lower. So even if your cost per acquisition goal is the same, it may still be beneficial to set up two separate portfolios, two separate bid strategies, each with the same cost per acquisition target, but applied to different campaigns, so that the expensive stuff can't go and hide behind your inexpensive keywords and reduce your results in that sort of a way. And then the nice thing with these Google dashboards is they will tell you why or why not they are working, right? So is there not enough data? Is the system still learning? And so that kind of helps you understand why the results are the way they are. Now, one super critical thing to get this to work correctly is you have to tell Google how your conversions are defined. As far as these conversions, a lot of people don't go to the conversion settings page. This page changes all the time. There's new options on there. So now you can have a plethora of conversions, but you can actually tell Google which ones of those conversions really, really matter to your business. So if you're tracking when somebody signs up as a Twitter follower, signs up for your newsletter, but also when they buy something, well, that's great. You should be tracking as many types of conversions as possible, because it helps you build that bigger picture. But when it comes to doing the bid management, you probably want to attribute a lot more value to the actual sale as opposed to somebody just signing up for a newsletter. And with the conversion settings, you see that box right there, include in conversions. If you check that, that's actually going to be used for bidding strategies. So that's going to be what Google uses as the number that really matters to your business. You can also change the attribution models from here. Attribution is another big topic for 2017. We're not going to cover this today, but if you haven't thought much about attribution models, that might be another thing to take a look at for 2017. Now, when it comes to AdWords, AdWords is nice. They can actually put tracking numbers automatically into your ad text. They can also automatically put it onto your landing page, so that if somebody calls up, they will know exactly what keyword and what click that corresponded to. Now, you may have read about this this last week, but Google is now starting to show phone numbers from a location extension, even when you also have a call extension with an ad. So that's a little bit of unpleasant news. If you haven't heard about this, do go and take a look at this, because it is going to be a change happening relatively soon, and it may somewhat change how you're able to track calls to your business. All right, and then the other point here is, if you're tracking calls, there's obviously more to it than just getting someone to dial the number. There's also what's the quality of that person who called you up. So only count those calls as a conversion if they've been longer than a certain amount of time, or use some sort of a system like Log My Calls, Marcheck, Dialog Tech, to really understand patterns within those phone calls. So was there a good interaction between the agent and the caller? Were certain words mentioned in that call? And how does that potentially convert or translate into a successful call versus a not so successful call? And then last but not least, Google has also done a pretty good job in terms of introducing ways for you to upload offline data back into the AdWords system. So if you have a CRM system like Salesforce where you're tracking kind of these longer term sales that you have, you can actually feed that data back into AdWords. The only thing you have to do at the beginning, when the first interaction from that customer comes in through AdWords, you have to capture on your form what they call the GCL ID. So this is a special parameter that's unique for every click. It sits in the URL string. You capture that, you put it into your CRM, and then eventually when that prospect becomes a customer 6 months later, now you can feed that data back into Google and they will tell you exactly what query, what click that corresponded to, and you can set better bids that way. So the bottom line on automation, AdWords has a ton of free features. So you look at DKI, dynamic keyword insertion, ad customizers, automated rules. These are all really simple to set up, and these are very basic automations, but they can save you a good amount of time. Now, my favorite happens to be AdWords scripts. These are a little bit harder to build, but people like myself and a number of others have written these scripts. We publish them on search engine land. You can go to freeadwordscripts.com. You can pick up these scripts, and the beauty about them is you can actually customize them. So the full code is there. If you want to take the concept to the next level, so say something like bidding by weather, or identifying underperforming ads and automatically pausing them, you can take what we've built, you can customize it to be your own, and then automate it to run as often as once per hour. And then if you have a really sophisticated use case and you have an engineering team available, then you want to use something like the AdWords API. It is the hardest to build, but it also has the fewest restrictions and works for really any size of account. So we see some people using that to do like inventory management. And that's the type of stuff we can do through Optimizer for you. But if you wanted to build an in-house solution, absolutely, the AdWords API is free and it's available to everyone. All right, so final topic that we'll cover here is audiences. So this is an unfortunate person who got a pretty old car, and he's just been stranded, right? So in the past, Google would always say, well, it's all about keyword advertising, right? So this person, it's the modern age now, so this photo I think is a bit old. The person probably doesn't have a cell phone, but nowadays he probably does have a cell phone, so he's going to pull out that cell phone and type in tow truck, and he's going to get rescued right there, right? Okay, so that's all good and well. But what I'm thinking is, why is this person driving an old car that breaks down, right? The dealership that sold him the car should have known how long ago that car was sold to him. They should have known that the car might have been on its last legs. They should have probably been marketing to him about all the great specials they have on newer vehicles. Okay, and so this is about marketing to people based on what you know about those people, rather than just some random folks typing in the keywords that matter to you. And when it comes to audience targeting, there's really a couple of things you can do. So remarketing lists for search ads, dynamic remarketing. We're not going to talk about that one much, but dynamic remarketing is basically for retailers to show the products that you've looked at in display ads as you go across the rest of the internet. We'll talk about customer match, and we'll briefly cover the newer options such as demographic targeting and similar audiences for search. So in remarketing, I'm sure you've all experienced it. You may all be sick of it, but it does work, right? So these are users who've been to your site before, and as they now go and do different things on the internet, they're being followed by your ads. You can certainly use smart lists, so these will help you build an audience if you don't have a ton of data of your own. They'll find similar audiences. But also avoid duplicating users. So don't put users on multiple lists with different date ranges, because then it makes it really hard to control who sees your ads and when. And like the annoyance that we all feel when we get stalked by these ads is, don't stalk users. Set some sort of a frequency limit to make sure people don't start associating your brand in some sort of a negative way because they see your ads too frequently. So those are some tips on that. Now, RLSA is remarketing lists for search ads. So this is the nice thing. Even if the person is doing a keyword search, if they happen to be on an audience list, then you can actually target them specifically. So this is far more powerful than just showing ads on social media, because it's the combination of knowing something about the person, but also knowing what that person is currently looking for, right? Keywords have always been an incredibly strong indicator of intent. That's why AdWords has done so well. And now you can overlay that with knowing something about the person and maybe what stage of the buying cycle they're in. So now what you can do is you can set different bid adjustments. So it's not just about exclusively targeting, which you could do, but it's also about bidding more, right? So bid more for a user who you know is farther along the customer journey, and maybe bid less for a user who is not as valuable, someone you know maybe only buys from your special sales that you have, never buys like a full price product. And then you can also differentiate ads for users on your list. So, this is again thinking about marketing, thinking about audiences. So what's the kind of message that will resonate with a certain group of people, and use that customization that you can now do to really connect with that user. So one thing you can also do is customer match. So customer match is nice because now these are not just people who've come to your website, but these are people that you have some sort of a relationship with. So this is Intercom. It's a product we use at Optimizer to stay in touch with our customers. But we know a lot of stuff about our customers based on how often they use our tools. So it's really a powerful way for us to be able to market to them. So for us as a software as a service business, we have an audience list of highly engaged users, as well as users who are slipping away, who haven't come back to our product in some time. And depending on which of these lists they're on, we can upload those email addresses into Google. They will do a customer match for us, and then we can show different messages. So those users who are slipping away, if we see them searching for a competitor keyword, we could literally show them an ad that says, hey there, Optimizer user, we notice you're kind of shopping around. Could we give you a demo to maybe show you some of the coolest features that we recently added? Right? So, and of course, you don't want to get it to be creepy and too personal, but that's kind of an example of what you could do. Whereas engaged users, maybe you just educate them about new tools, so you don't spend quite as much money on those ads, but you still want to keep them kind of engaged on an ongoing basis. And when it comes to retail, I mean, you could segment by big spenders or shoppers who return a lot of items. And for your own businesses, I'm sure you can think of great ways to use this as well. And then a really new option here is demographic targeting. So nowadays, even on keyword targeted campaigns, Google will tell you what they know about the age ranges of those people doing those searches, as well as the genders. And you can exclude some of these. So if you don't think, say you're selling like retirement plans, okay? So maybe you don't want to sell those to people between 18 and 24 for whatever reason, and so you exclude that list, or you just bid much less for that list. So that's demographics. And then you can also do similar audiences now on search, and so that is basically taking a remarketing list and having Google find similar users based on having had similar behavior. So that's a really great way to expand how many people you can show your ads to based on knowing something about who that person is. So those, I think, are some of the big topics for 2017 to be successful. So if you need some help putting all of that into practice, we have some pretty cool tools at Optimizer. We have 2-week free trials, so plans are relatively affordable, starting at $129 a month. So check those out, and then once you sign up, I'm also happy to give you a one-on-one demo of what we can do. There's my contact information, and so at this point, Phil, let's take a look at some of the questions people have asked.
All right, great, Fred. That was an awesome presentation. I took a bunch of notes here. I have a question, but I'm going to wait. I see a question came in from Christopher here, and he wrote, when testing the new expanded text ads, do you recommend showing the ads at the same frequency, or do you recommend letting Google choose how often to display the ads?
Yeah, Christopher, that's a good question. So, and for those others, Christopher is asking about the ad rotation settings. So in Google at the campaign level, you can tell Google how to rotate the ad. So is it going to be an even rotation, which is basically a coin flip and randomly showing one of the available ads, or should they optimize based on higher CTR or higher conversion rates? It kind of depends, Christopher. So if you're measuring the results yourself through a tool like Optimizer, or using an AdWords script, then we generally recommend you do even rotation so that you'll get approximately an even number of data points across all the different ads. If you just want to have Google handle it, then I would go for one of those options that they have optimized by CTR, for example. Now, the one risk I think with having Google optimize it is that people often mistakenly think they're doing ad text testing when in fact they don't. And so there's a column that you can enable in the interface, which is like % served or something to that effect. when you look at that for the ads, you might see that even though you have 5 ads, one of those gets 97% of all the impressions, and the other 3 are, or the other 4 are splitting the 3% that's left. So you're not really testing anymore, right? Google has made a determination about which ads are the losers, but the problem is they don't delete them for you. They just kind of stop serving them. And if you were just looking at that ad group, you might actually think you had 5 experiments running, when in fact Google's already determined there's only one good one, and it would have been beneficial for you to delete the 4 losers and put in some new ad text variations.
All right, great. I had a question because I loved the data at the beginning with showing if DKI in the headline helped or didn't help the click-through rate, and I was curious if that was across all devices, or if you were just was that data just for desktop searches or just mobile?
Yeah, we didn't segment it for devices, and it's a very good question. I probably should rerun all of those studies now that we have a little bit more data. But so I think when people ultimately come to this point and do the test for themselves, do look at brand versus non-brand, look at different devices, look at different networks. I mean, on Google search versus the search partners network, behavior and results may be very different. So, but what we were kind of trying to do was give people some good starting guidelines as a starting point. But as you get more sophisticated and deeper into the ad text testing, yeah, certainly start segmenting things and then hyper optimizing for each of those segments.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I'd love to. If you do run those for specific devices, I'd love to see that.
Okay.
Another question came in. Okay, great. Another question from Kevin. He said maybe this is off topic, but any recommendations on keyword research tools?
Yeah, so I mean, I hear a lot of people talk about SEMrush. They like that one. I mean, so from our perspective at Optimizer, we look very heavily at the search query reports because we believe that Google is really, you can do all this keyword research, but if it's not in line with what Google's doing, then it's kind of pointless. So we almost like to have a good variety of topically relevant keywords, a good mix of broad matches and phrase matches and exact matches. And we use those broad matches to help us acquire new query data. And then so we look at the query data to figure out which of these queries have actually driven conversions. And if that's the case, then we actually add it as a keyword to the account. If we find that certain of these broad match keywords drive a lot of queries that don't convert, we'll actually pick out commonalities between the words that don't convert and add those as negatives to the account. So I think that search terms report that's right there in Google is pretty amazing, but it really kind of depends on what you need as well. Now, the other thing I'll say is we actually have this tool where you can build up a campaign in the beginning, and it's based off of spreadsheets. So what we ask people to do is give us a full inventory of all the products they sell or all the services they have and kind of how they break it down. So for a plumber, for example, it could be quite important to know what city that plumber is in. So even if you're serving the whole San Francisco Bay Area, maybe it makes a difference how quickly you can get to the city of Palo Alto versus the city of Mountain View where Google is based. And so give us a spreadsheet with all of those cities, all of the different services you perform, maybe how quickly you typically get to those addresses. And then based on that, we can do all of these cool keyword combinations and also make super relevant ad text based on what each of those segments happens to be. And now you got a great starting point, and now the search query data will start to roll in, and then you can make decisions that are based off of what has actually happened in your account as opposed to some prediction that someone is making. Now, so sort of, I was built here as the Google insider, so let me give you an interesting tidbit as well about my days at Google when we were working on the keyword tool. But engineers, they love to do keyword prediction tools. And nowadays, there's all this talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and that's what engineers want to work on, right? And so all of these keyword prediction tools, they were always way off back in the day. And of course, they've gotten better, but it's just a really hard problem to predict what's going to happen based on a limited set of historical data. And so what advertisers were always asking for was, don't try to predict these things. Just tell us historically what's happened and let me make the decision about what I think the growth in this industry is going to be, or whether people this year are still going to search the same way as they did last year. And so when you look at keyword tools, kind of ask yourself the question too, do you want those predictions, which could be correct, but they could also be way off? Or do you want to go for something, a little bit based more on historical numbers?
Yeah, and I'll echo what you just said, Fred, in terms of using the query report or search terms report in AdWords. So we have a lot of clients and prospects who ask a similar question, what's the best tool? And what they're basically getting at is, how do you predict whether or not a keyword is actually going to be profitable for your business? And the reality is, which I think Fred was saying, is you don't know until you test it. No expert can tell you this keyword is going to generate this ROI. You need to test it, and you may find that other queries are actually the most profitable for you after you've done extensive keyword research. There's just keywords that you would never have thought of, or no tools will tell you about, and you'll have to use that, pull that from the report, and then create ad groups specific to that and start optimizing for those new keywords that you found from that report.
Yeah, that's spot on. And there's also the notion there that there's no such thing as a bad keyword. There's only a bad bid. And so basically what that's saying is people sometimes kind of freak out about keywords that aren't converting when that keyword is still a relevant keyword to their business. So rather than taking the knee-jerk reaction of just disabling that keyword, you really should figure out why is it not converting, right? Is it the landing page? Is it the ad text? Is it some combination of those things? Because at the end of the day, it's still relevant to our business. We should be able to convert on that. And then at some point too, you might realize, well, we have great conversions, and but it's still too expensive. Okay, so now maybe it's no longer an AdWords issue, but it's a business issue. Like, do you have more expensive shipping costs or cost of goods acquisition than your competitors? And is that why they can be profitable with those higher CPCs, whereas you can't? And so there's only so much you can do in terms of optimizing AdWords, but at some point it's also about optimizing your business, which I know is tough. I mean, I went and mailed a package yesterday. It was a TiVo box. I paid $70 to mail it, and I'm like, oh my God, how can Amazon even like profitably ship this to me for free on Prime? But those are ultimately some of the questions that we do have to answer for our businesses to remain relevant.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had another question. So you were looking at the demographic data. Before I get into that, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. Fred and I do have a hard stop, so we might be able to take one more question after this. But to get back to my question, you were looking at demographic data, so age and gender, and I was just curious to get your take on the unknown category. So if you start looking at your demographic data, you'll get a percentage. In some cases, a large percentage will be unknown, which basically means Google doesn't know if it was a man or a woman, or what doesn't know the age group. Do you have a particular strategy to go after the unknown category?
No, not so much. And for us, it's really very data-driven, right? So we just look at these different segments, and then if the numbers tell us that men convert much better than women for a certain campaign or certain products, then we'll just adjust the bids for those. And then the unknowns, I mean, we don't really do much with that. And so it's like demographics are sort of that top level of knowing who your customer is. I'm much more a fan of trying to get into doing customer match and actually uploading your email lists, because now it doesn't almost matter so much if it's a man or a woman, but it's like, was that a customer of ours before? What products have they bought? What services have they used? And what does that tell us they're likely to want to do with us in the future?
Okay. All right, well, I think we made it through all the questions. And Fred, I think you mentioned if people do have more questions, should they contact you at that email that you're showing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to email me right there, and happy to give you a demo of the system we have, or just chat about AdWords in general.
All right, great. Well, this was an awesome presentation from my point of view. I loved all the data that you showed, and yeah, hopefully we can do another one of these again later this year.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Phil, and thanks everyone for listening.
All right, take care. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.